I'm Seb Matthews, acting as chair for this evening, a Green Party member, trade unionist in Unite, and activist for Unite's Affiliate, the trade union-sponsored Ukraine Solidarity campaign. As a Green concerned for Ukraine in the face of the Russian invasion, I collaborated this summer with a small group of other Greens, including one of our panellists, Viktoriya Ball, in drafting a wide-ranging solidarity motion to bring to Green Autumn Conference. As a formally designated late motion, unfortunately time wasn't made for it in the plenaries, but through conversations, materials available from the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign's conference stall, and social media promotion, we built on members' interest and support to form the expanded host group for this evening, the Green.Ukraine.Solidarity Network. So, this evening, we meet at a time when Ukraine is facing the devastation of war, while also confronting the urgent realities of ecological crisis. These two struggles are not separate, they are deeply intertwined. The choices made in Ukraine today about energy, agriculture, reconstruction, and justice will shape not only the country's future, but also the wider global climate movement. Tonight, we're joined by three voices who bring unique perspectives on this challenge. Natalie Bennett, Green peer in the UK House of Lords and former leader of the Green Party of England and Wales, who has long worked to connect parliamentary politics with grassroots climate action. We're also joined from Ukraine by Sofiia Bodun, a member of the Party of Greens of Ukraine, who can speak to the opportunities and obstacles facing Ukraine's green political movement at this critical moment. She may have some difficulties with her connection because there are currently planned electricity blackouts due to Russia's recent attacks on Ukraine's energy network. Sofiia is actively engaged in developing the work of the Party of Greens of Ukraine on an international level, and she is also involved in charity work and participates in social projects and activities aimed at ensuring sustainable development at the level of local councils. She works in PR and marketing. Thirdly, last but not least, Viktoriya Ball, a climate activist and organiser of the feminist youth climate movement Rozvi, as well as a member of the Green Party of England and Wales, who represents the energy and vision of Ukraine's younger generation of activists. Together, these three will help us explore what solidarity means in practice, how Ukraine's voice can be amplified in global climate debates, and how movements across borders can learn from one another. After opening remarks, I'll invite them into conversation with some questions, and we'll open the floor for your contributions. Now, please be aware that to allow a range of voices, and in full fairness to the audience and panellists as a whole, time to ask each question will be limited to a maximum of 2 minutes. That's on a par for Green Party conference that just happened at the beginning of the month. We ask that attendees respect the spirit of the meeting rather than oblige us to enforce this. So, without further ado, I'll now ask Natalie if she'd like to give an account of her recent trip to Ukraine and the issues it raised and it uncovered. Natalie, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Seb, and thank you everyone who's come along this evening, and thank you very much for everyone who's organised this and made this happen. And I want to start off by introducing myself and saying I am totally not the expert on Ukraine here this evening. So I'm one of the two Green Party members of the House of Lords, and I've made 2 trips to Ukraine, the last of which was the second of which was a couple of weeks ago, when I went with the all-party parliamentary group on explosive weapons and their impacts, and spent about a week in Ukraine. Before that, in 2023, I went with the European Greens for a couple of days, and things were still very tense and very edgy then. And we went to places like Bucha and saw certain things, but it was difficult to get out of the hotel. There was a great concern about safety, whereas this time I was much more able to actually spread out. But I am not the expert on Ukraine as a result of 2 visits. But what I want to do is share some experiences and share the knowledge and spread that around. Now, the all-party parliamentary group that I went with, perhaps the name is not immediately clear. Essentially, it's about landmines, unexploded ordnance, the issues which Ukraine is now, sadly, the world leader through the experience of these so many years of Russian attacks. Now, I would like to do, and this is going to be a bit of a, I need someone to turn on, sharing is not turned on. So I'm hoping to be able to share my screen so I can show some pictures. If anyone can technically help me with that, I can do without the pictures, but it might be nice if we could possibly make that work. There we are. Right.
Should be able to now, Natalie.
Thank you very much. Content only. Now, there we go. Let's see if we can make this work. Apologies, everyone. We didn't have it's entirely my fault that we didn't have a chance to do this beforehand, which is because I was running a little bit late, which anyone who knows me will know is not at all terribly surprising. Right. If I can now just get the that down. Right. Okay. I think we're now organized. Now, this is not actually a picture from Ukraine, but this is a picture which was shared with me today from some of the people I went to Ukraine with. And this is a picture of what happened in Ukraine last night. Now, basically, the yellow, the drones, the other colors, air-launched ballistic missiles, which are the really heavy stuff. Now, I'm sharing that it was a very big attack that the Ukraine suffered last night, and you can read reports about that online. But just one of the things that by going to Ukraine that I got to see was what that means on the ground. Now, the next picture, this is actually a picture from the road in which the Parliament building is located. And, not terribly serious damage in the overall scale of things, but just on the corner down from that building, there was I think it was a drone strike that hit and killed a family that lived in a top floor flat. So this is the reality of life in Ukraine today. A lot of the missiles, the attacks are stopped, but some of them are not. And in fact, we saw actually in the Parliament building, there was a missile that hit the Parliament building and the warhead didn't explode. And had that warhead exploded, a large part of the Parliament building would have been taken out. So it's interesting because when I compare the two visits that I made in 23 and this year, this is now so much life for Ukrainians that when the air alerts go off, and that previous picture that I showed you, you can actually get in real time pictures like that. You get an app on your phone and it alerts you every time that there's an air raid. And I didn't bother to get one of these because I didn't know how to interpret them, but you can actually get on those apps explanations of what kind of missiles, again, the different colors like that, so the experts can interpret whether to go to the shelter or not. And mostly my experience was this time in Kyiv and Lviv, people didn't go to the shelters. Life goes on as usual. And that's one of the striking things I felt about Kyiv, was how much people were just living their life as usual because they didn't really have much alternative after so much war. The next picture, I went with, those are two on the far right, those are two Lib Dem MPs who were the other members of the delegation, and everyone else there is Ukrainian MPs. And so that's actually in the Parliament building. And one of the things that was really striking is we were not particularly a high-level delegation, but there was a real keenness to meet with us and speak to us. And Ukraine, the MPs, the officials, there was a very strong sense of awareness that they need to make contact with and speak with the outside world and explain what life is like and what they're trying to do to deal with it with the outside world. And so we did meet, including some very senior people. So that is actually us meeting with the Alexei Sobolov, who's the Minister for the Economy, Agriculture, and something else, and the Deputy Minister, Ihor, forgive my pronunciation, Bez Katalevani. So, there was a real eagerness for Ukraine to share the experiences. Some of the other things that we saw is we also visited SESU, which is the State Emergency Services of Ukraine. And of course, these are the people who have to deal with the experience of when they're essentially the rescue services, the fire and rescue services as we describe them. So immediately after a missile is hit, these are the people who have to deal with those circumstances. And we also went to the training college where young people are being trained to be the officers doing that. And one of the things that I think was really striking is in this area, as in many others, Ukraine, of course, is now an absolute expert as a country with the experience of dealing with so much. And that also means things like worrying about the biological impacts, the chemical impacts. Missiles, of course, have the explosive strike, but one of the things we were looking at, thinking about the residue, is what kind of long-term environmental and human health impacts all of these are likely to have. So I said we were mostly focused on mine clearing and unexploded ordnance. So yeah, this is not a photo I'm going to spread very widely, but I will share it with this group. That is me hidden behind a mines advisory group full kit. That's me on the right. And these kind of visits, you can look a bit silly, and I'm not really one for donning strange uniforms, etc. But it is actually really telling when you do that and realize just how incredibly uncomfortable, how hot. It wasn't a warm day, but you got hot very quickly. And people who are clearing the mines, clearing the unexploded ordnance, that's their working life, their working day. One of the other things, so to give you a sense of what it's like there, they're not wearing the full kit, but we actually visited a live area where there was still unexploded ordnance, and this is what it's like. It's a very slow process checking an area, and that's one of the things that really was driven home about the situation in Ukraine is 29% of Ukraine, there is some risk of there being mines or unexploded ordnances in. That's 174,000 square kilometres. That is a huge issue, and the country is really one of the things our visit was very much focused on, was how they can do what are known as non-technical surveys, very quickly work out where the risk areas are and which areas, in fact, can be farmed. People can go back to their homes. These are huge issues. And what we saw on the visit, particularly to Sesu, looking at the training for mine clearers and clearers of booby traps, etc., we saw some absolutely horrendous booby traps, for example. So a children's book that had been booby trapped to turn into a mine. We saw the way in which Russians are using cluster munitions. It's one giant rocket, basically, but then the submunition is about the size of it, looks a bit like a firework. And the thing about these, as with landmines, is they're not designed to kill someone. They're designed to maim them. And so you have a country which has been bombarded with these weapons, many of which are actually illegal, with these booby traps in areas where the Russians have occupied. And all of that has to be dealt with. And of course, very sadly, it isn't always dealt with. People are the victims of this. And one of the places we visited was in Lviv, Superhumans, which is, I think, without a doubt, probably the now global expert in dealing with prostheses. And we met some of the people who are being treated there. That is Eddie Scott, is actually a Briton. He was there and he showed us the photos. He was there as a humanitarian rescuer in a vehicle that was very clearly marked as such. And it was fired on by the Russians, and Eddie lost both an arm and a leg. And this is the reality of what you see when you visit the circumstances there in Ukraine. But finally, I want to end on a positive note, because actually one of the things I mentioned, how in Kyiv people are getting ahead on with life. They're tackling many of the issues of today. And so this is actually another member of the Ukrainian parliament who I'd already had some previous contact with, because she's a fellow member of the Ecocide Alliance, which is a group of people, parliamentarians from around Europe and beyond, who are actually campaigning to get the creation of the International Offence of Ecocide. And Ukraine has been really working on this in terms of domestic law. And so because Ukraine is actually facing some of the greatest challenges of any country around the world, I mean, obviously we're also seeing horrendous things in Sudan, many other places, but still Ukraine is a place that has many of the structures, has the capacity to actually tackle these issues and tackle the big questions. And so, not to be all be negative about this. There's actually lots of really positive things happening in Ukraine. And so I wanted to finish with that. I'm happy to talk about what people in the audience wanted to speak about, but I wanted to do was share the experience and really give people some kind of sense of what it's like, what the experience is like. I will also put in the chat box at some point, I wrote a piece for Yorkshire Bylines, which sets out some more of some of the things I've talked about tonight. But that's an introduction to what my visit's like. And so what I'm now going to do is attempt to unshare my screen, because I don't do this very often. There you are, there it is. And hand back to you, Seb, and I look forward to hearing from the other contributors and taking part in the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Natalie, for that, your reflections from the UK perspective. Sofiia, let's turn to you. How does that resonate with the realities facing the Green Party in Ukraine right now? Please take as long as you like. We're doing very well for time. It's all very healthy time-wise, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalie. It was really great. It was super interesting. Next time when you come to Ukraine, you can have my number and I can bring you to the training military ground. It is owned by a good friend of mine. And if it's interesting how it works from the inside to speak with our army, there are many representatives from Britain, from America, so we can talk. We can talk much. You can be involved in all this if it's interesting for you. And of course, dear colleagues, thank you so much for the invitation to this evening. And of course, we often say that solidarity with Ukraine is important, but of course, in this time, solidarity, green solidarity is very important too. And I wanted to thank the people of United Kingdom and your party, of course, for your care and for your biggest support through all this time. Today, my name is Sophie. I represent the Green Party of Ukraine, and which celebrates the 35th anniversary this May. Yeah, and we once had experience in the national parliamentary. And today, of course, we continue our work at the national councils. Through local councils in different regions. Maybe you heard about this city. It's Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, Cherkasy city, and Chernivtsi. And if you're talking about our Green Young wing, can I say like this? So Green Youth of Ukraine is also very active. And just last week, they had an event in Kiev, gathered through young people from all over the country. So they all came, they all talk about the proximate situation that is going on through all the country. And of course, we cannot, the word changed all of us. You know, and for the first Putin verse, it's not only against Ukraine, it's a war between tyranny and democracy. I can say it's a war between future and the past. And Ukraine now is fighting not only for its land, but of course for the values of all free world. And I can say so from the first day of invasion, our party office in the center of Kiev continued to work. And yeah, we provided humanitarian and psychological help. So I invite everyone who will be in Kiev to our office. It is safety there, I can promise you. And we can make tea and cookies and small talk. And I want to say, many of members of our party are now defending on the front lines. And even our general secretary, you may know Serhiy Luhovik, he is serving now in the army. And of course, despite all these challenges, all these rockets, drones, no electricity, no water, we keep going. We organize meetings, conferences, we organize training, and we talk about how to protect, first of all, our environment, how to rebuild our economy, and how to prepare for the future. What future will we have after our victory? And we are very interested in, first of all, your experience in local councils, and it is very important for us. And of course, we also want to build more cooperation between both of us. And young people in Ukraine now face many difficulties, but I don't want to leave my country. From the first days of war, I stayed in Kiev. Yeah, I love the country, but I always come. My heart is here in Ukraine. And of course, I want to propose you, maybe we can organize some joint projects or online, if it's interesting for you, and offline. We can make it in Uzhgorod city. It's near the border, Hungarian border. If it is very safety here, I can organize everything for you. We are open, we are ready, and we are very happy to cooperate. Thank you again so much for your friendship, for your green solidarity, and for listening.
Well, thank you, Sofiia. Sofiia has alluded to political and structural challenges. Viktoriya, from your work with young activists and the feminist climate movement, how do you see these issues playing out on the ground?
Thank you. So I wanted to today share my perspective as a British Ukrainian climate justice activist who has been active with the Ukrainian climate movement since 2020, particularly at the beginning through the Fridays for Future movement in Ukraine. So you may know it as the movement that Greta Thunberg started, of course, in 2019, demanding the phase out of fossil fuels. And in 2022, of course, just as Sofiia has said, the Ukrainian climate movement was deeply uprooted. Part of the movement had to evacuate abroad. Some activists from not just Fridays for Future, but many different environmental initiatives joined the frontline effort, whether as volunteers or frontline defenders. And there are still very close ties to them, and continuing to support our both environmental and frontline defenders at the same time. Since 2022, personally, I've been part of the campaign for an embargo on Russian fossil fuels. And this campaign was launched with many other national youth climate justice movements, particularly from Eastern Europe, because the fight for Ukraine's freedom escalated not only as an existential fight for Ukraine and our rights as a people, but also the safety and security of all of Eastern Europe and beyond, perhaps we could say even the whole of Europe. And in fact, there was this very quick realization after the start of the full-scale invasion that fossil fuels were the main funder of Russia's full-scale war, and the years of war also building up to it. So we, as Ukrainian climate justice activists, worked a lot on a global campaign to show that fossil fuel phase out was the key to peace, because fossil fuels have been the funder of not just the Russian authoritarian regime, but in fact global militarization and many other authoritarians around the world. And even now, oil, coal, and gas remain the biggest funders of Russia's state budget. Still, Europe continues to spend money on Russian liquefied natural gas, and that's been over 7 billion euros just in 2024 spent, which is on top of the rest of the 400 billion since the start of the full-scale invasion. And unfortunately, Ukraine's allies are not doing absolutely everything they can to stop the Russian regime's fossil economy. For example, in the UK, there are companies that continue to contribute towards Russia's war chest. For example, there is Seapeak Maritime, based in Glasgow, that has provided shipping vessels to continue to transport Russian LNG. And likewise, there are still British firms that insure these gas tankers, which fund occupation and genocide. Since February 2022, UK-owned and UK-insured vessels have carried around £45 billion worth of Russia's LNG exports, and that's 76% of them. And very sadly, that's four times the UK's total aid to Ukraine up until February of 2025 this year. And here I'd really like to call for the support of all Greens from across the UK, and because there is a parliamentary petition that has been launched this month by the Stop Seapeak coalition of Ukrainian, British and other European campaigners, of which also Ukraine Solidarity campaign, the co-organizer of this event, is part of which I am also part of, and it urges the government to ban any UK company from shipping and insuring Russian LNG. And I'll shortly also share the link to it. So if you can sign this petition, distribute it as wide as possible, please do. And there are also some different webinars that are coming up in terms of how you can get involved in the campaign further in November. And to continue, for me, being part of this global movement that's highlighting these issues has also been about showing that the youth climate movement has been and continues to be a really active voice for Ukraine's liberation from the oppressive Russian occupation, from its propaganda, from all these colonial narratives that persist, not just from Russia, but unfortunately also parts of the global political left. These narratives that Ukrainians are simply being manipulated by different sides of the conflict to gain profit from them, which really discounts how over centuries Ukrainian resistance has been able to continue to win sovereignty and dignity for a people historically oppressed by Russia, whether it was Imperial Russia or its successors in the form of the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation. And I wanted to address this because this perception essentially denies Ukrainian civil society from the agency that we really hold to continually fight for a better future, even during wartime, for example, for a just transition from fossil fuels so that Ukrainians have healthy air, clean water, clean soil, but also sort of justice as a sort of in a broader sense, because we cannot have climate action without safeguarding our democracy, our independence, our self-determination, which also rest on all of these basic human rights that are very deeply interconnected with the safeguarding and the stewardship of nature, which is impossible because of Russian occupation on much of Ukraine's land at the moment. And that starts also with recognizing that the role of environmental movements in Ukraine is crucial for Ukraine's resilience throughout these years of war, and it's also crucial to build solidarity networks with these movements, just as Natalie has been doing, for example, through her visits. And through our international work, my close friend and colleague from the climate movement, who is based in Kyiv, and I noticed that it requires a lot of resources currently to be heard on this sort of international stage by decision makers on such difficult issues like embargo and sanctions on Russian fossil fuels. And so thanks to the solidarity and help of our colleagues, for example, from Eastern Europe, we were able to start a new feminist climate movement, Rozvi Youth Climate Initiative, because we noticed that many of those who are engaged in this work are particularly young women they have unfortunately often not so much of a support system that would enable them to grow as activists and change makers. And of course, they continue to face all of the risks of war and conflict and all of the sort of impact that brings economically, socially, mentally. And so in the meantime, of course, the scale of Russia's ecocide in Ukraine is only getting greater. That's amounting to billions of damages to protected natural zones, which have become increasingly inaccessible for Ukrainians due to, of course, the landmines as well that are continually left there by the Russian forces. So our new movement, Rozvi, became all about building a community around this common vision of a resilient Ukraine, where a green transformation is led by local communities that are most affected by the war, and also the climate crisis, since all of the ecocide is causing a lot more climate vulnerability for frontline Ukrainian communities. At the same time, each year we are seeing also record-breaking heat waves, which particularly affect our frontline defenders, but of course various vulnerable groups within our communities. And in this vision, we want to support young people, especially young women, to engage with climate policy, which continues to develop in Ukraine during wartime, because we need to ensure that climate solutions that are being implemented, and they are being implemented particularly as part of humanitarian aid, for example, solar panels that are being installed thanks to international support to counter these blackouts that Sofiia is unfortunately facing quite often these days, and like people like Sofiia are facing these days. And these solutions are known to have shown in practice to be much more resilient because they are, for example, decentralized, more decentralized. They are more rooted in democratic principles, and they are being shown to be effective and have helped Ukrainian communities, for example, even throughout occupation when energy sources were even more under attack. So our movement currently works on calling for a shift from fossil fuel subsidies towards community-owned renewable energy, so that we move away from this outdated infrastructure, which is much more vulnerable to Russian attacks, that is based on fossil fuels. Of course, taking inspiration from existing cases in Ukraine, especially green energy cooperatives, and we also work to provide climate education opportunities for young people, because we know that they are the new generation of workers who also have to adapt to work with all of these high security risks, the trauma of war, while also there is this need to pass on the expertise and innovation that is happening in Ukraine despite the war. And so we work in collaboration with many different youth NGOs, local experts, educators, and we create spaces for dialogue with government bodies, but also international partners without whom green reconstruction projects would not be possible, that have been launched all across Ukraine in the past couple of years, especially. And I would like to also strongly support the call from Sofiia to support Ukraine in a practical way, whether it be through solidarity visits or some sort of direct projects between our parties, so the Green Party of Ukraine and of England. That has been something that we discussed and pushed for as part of our campaign ahead of the Green Party Autumn Conference, which I was part of, to promote the Stand With Ukraine motion, and something else that I wanted to highlight is essentially that the most important demands of that motion, which didn't pass this time, but it's something that we'd like to develop ahead of future party conferences. Firstly, the imposition of stronger targeted sanctions on corporate actors that enable Russian aggression, including in the UK, and so that we are able to close all of these fossil fuel trade loopholes that allow Russian energy sources to be traded through UK companies. And of course, I have been talking a lot about green reconstruction, but unfortunately, without humanitarian and defensive military aid, none of that is possible. And it is critically needed right now to protect civilians and defend territorial integrity. And of course, lastly, it's really important that we continue showing solidarity with Ukrainian communities who have unfortunately become displaced and are now refugees on UK soil, so that they continue to receive systemic support and integration. Thank you very much. And I'm open to any questions.
What I will do is open the floor after asking some very quick questions to our panelists. Briefly, Natalie, before we go to the floor, from your experience in the UK and the EU networks, what lessons or strategies would or could Ukrainian Greens adapt or avoid?
I think, I'm to mention a framework to this. I've long been involved with the European Green Foundation, which is the umbrella group for the think tanks of green think tanks across Europe. And I'm on the board of the Green European Journal. And so I think one of the things is not to reinvent the wheel, to actually try and learn from other parties and other experiences in other places. And so obviously, each individual situation, each nation is different. The circumstances of the Ukraine are very specific to what the country has been through. But nonetheless, there's an awful lot to learn and to reach out and to make those networks and not try and go it alone. And I think this is something that the Green Party of England and Wales, over my time, and I joined in 2006, we tended to be little isolated pockets of people working away in their own town or their own city. And now we're far more networked and joined up. So I think one of the things that, I really urge the Ukrainian Greens to do, and clearly you are already doing, is to reach out and seek that support and seek that knowledge, so that you can start from the higher level that other people have been able to work out, systems. And I think because so much has been destroyed and so much damage has been done, you have the potential to really, it's a horrible phrase, misused in the UK, but build back better. Don't settle for just replacing what was there before, but indeed look for, and I think there's a great awareness of this. I think of when I was just near Booker, visiting a place where the medical clinic had been taken out, and they said, well, we stuck a solar panel on the roof and we were able to get it up and running again very quickly. So those resilient, flexible systems is something that they can also be very, very cost effective. They can also be controlled with local control, local support, that kind of decision making. I think, we shouldn't underestimate. It's very obvious that rebuilding after the war politically is going to be a challenge to actually build a functional political structure. In conditions of war, you've got to deal with what's in front of you. And we know that after a war, there's lots of challenges. There's lots of people who will have been harmed and damaged and come back, and you need the mental health support. And I was very pleased to see the couple of the visits we made. There was a very strong awareness. We were told that there hadn't been much mental health awareness in the past, but there's certainly something that's growing. So I think learn from others, acknowledge that you're building something new and you can actually build something much better than what was there before. Huge challenges, but huge possibilities as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Natalie. So I'll just return briefly to Sofiia. Would you like the opportunity to respond to Natalie and to Viktoriya's input? For example, how do you see the Green Party role in Ukraine, in shaping Ukraine's post-war recovery, especially in terms of energy or agriculture and justice for affected communities? And of course, secondarily, which forms of international solidarity risk being just symbolic for you rather than practical?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. The Green Party of Ukraine, first of all, sees its role in promoting green and fair recovery, can I say like this? So rebuilding our country with clean energy, first of all, with sustainable agriculture, with justice for affected communities. And of course, we want Ukraine recovery to be modern, to be ecological, and people be more centered. And the best form, in my opinion, of solidarity is our practical support. It's about joint projects, it's about knowledge exchange, some green investments. Of course, symbolic words, it's always good, but let's see the real actions and cooperation bring us through all these challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right. Well, in that case, I will open up questions to the floor. I will reiterate that we are asking participants and guests to confine themselves to 2 minutes when they ask a question, rather than oblige us to cut them short, as we wouldn't want to cause any offence. Okay, thank you, everyone. Please do start.
I can see Tom Scott's got his hand, so shall we start with Tom?
Super. Please, Sasha, do the honours.
Thanks so much, and thank you, Sophie and Victoria, for your very informative and inspiring words. And I think there's so much that actually we can learn from your experience of resisting war, resisting fascist invasion in Ukraine. What you were saying about renewables being so much more resilient than fossil fuel energy structure is really interesting, I think. Victoria, you already kind of touched on this, talking about some sections of the left in globally, and certainly in this country, who are mischaracterizing the war in Ukraine as basically a conflict between two imperialisms, and suggesting that we shouldn't be supporting either side, and certainly not giving any military support. What would you say to people on the left who take that line?
I think it's very important that we remember kind of when we are trying to frame our solidarity with the affected people by a conflict or a war or a genocide. Are we framing it from the perspective of justice? And that really should be the core of any solidarity. I think they are sort of indivisible. And when we're talking about justice in the Ukrainian context, the issue that I see very often in these sort of pro-colonial narratives that I've mentioned, which remove Ukrainians' agency, the issue there is that there is this false equivalence of the Ukrainian side with the Russian side quite often. And we've recently seen that in some UK also political debate, unfortunately, where people are saying, well, there are these sort of characters within maybe the Ukrainian government which are not supporting Ukrainian communities as much as they could. They are not inclusive in some ways. And I think when we compare Ukrainian leadership with Russian leadership, they are worlds apart. We are talking about a perpetrator of genocide in terms of Russia's regime, which has committed thousands upon thousands of war crimes in the past years, which has not been documented at all on the Ukrainian side. We are talking of humane treatment of, for example, Russian soldiers by the Ukrainian side in terms of capture and military exchanges. We are talking of the fact that the Ukrainian side does not target civilian infrastructure like schools, kindergartens, and critical infrastructure like in terms of sort of social infrastructure in Russia. And so I think it's really important when we're hearing those narratives to look at the facts and verify them with the best available sources. And those all align with the fact that Ukraine is fighting a defensive war against an imperialist regime, for which we have, again, sort of hundreds of years of evidence for. And it is really important that we correct the twisting of history in this case, because unfortunately that is what results in this sort of really sad reality of old history repeating itself, and the discussions that include things like potential appeasement of a dictatorship, which cannot be in any way whatsoever allowed.
Sofiia, would you like to say anything about that?
Yeah, I just have a small question for everyone. Maybe you can say, how can we continue our cooperation and to make it truly effective in the nearest time through all this situation? I will be very grateful for your response.
Well, I think that ties very closely. And Viktoriya, I'm going to come back to you, a questioning from Dominic Taylor in the Q&A, who's saying, thank you very much for this extremely inspiring meeting, is asking the panel's thoughts on the existing structures and organisations that offer the most helpful opportunities for direct solidarity action. And Dominic says he's based in East Anglia, whether that's visiting to volunteer in the community, civic work, or other remote solidarity action. And I'll broaden this out not just to East Anglia, because I don't necessarily expect you to know about East Anglia, but around the country. I mean, one of the things I'm going to throw in here, and something that's on my list of things to do, and I'm afraid there's only 2 Green peers in the House of Lords, and I juggle many things, but I think Britain has welcomed a great many Ukrainians here as refugees, and I've seen various figures on the current number from somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000. But I think the government has not always provided the support and the certainty, and so supporting Ukrainian refugees, although that's only kind of indirectly supporting Ukraine, it's something that I certainly want to do some more work on in the House of Lords, and perhaps that's something that we can also work on. But I don't know, Viktoriya, if you'd like to suggest anything else that you know of that people might find in their local town, or that people can do remotely. Thanks.
I think I can particularly comment on projects that different party members can support remotely. Of course, I mentioned a lot of community-based projects that support Ukrainian towns directly, for example, by installation of solar panels for critical infrastructure, climate adaptation projects that allow said infrastructure to continue to be in a working state, even in the face of climate impacts and war. So I'd really recommend following the work of different organizations that I can send you the link of there. Natalie mentioned the phrase "Build Ukraine Back Better," and in fact that is a sort of platform for European and Ukrainian environmental NGOs to collaborate. They meet regularly and discuss, in particular, collaboration around the support of Ukraine's European integration, but also various progress in Ukraine's green recovery policy and practical projects that you can also find on the list of sort of organizations where you have links to their websites to sort of like one particular NGO that I'd particularly highlight is, for example, Eco Club, who do a lot of this sort of community energy stuff around the country, and also Ecodia in Ukrainian, Eco Action in English, is a very prominent environmental NGO. And I think besides this, something that the Ukrainian environmental movement would really benefit from is, for example, support with campaigning expertise, basic resources for this, but it's something that could be another conversation.
Okay, and I can see a hand from Howie Hawkins. Howie, over to you for a question, with noting Seb's comment about lengths of contributions. Thanks.
Sure, this is an answer to Sophie's appeal, asking what can they do in Ukraine to help us act in solidarity. And my suggestion is more statements from the Green Party in Ukraine, like your statement on the minerals deal earlier this year. And that undercuts this narrative that, what's going on in Ukraine is a war between NATO and Russia. The Ukrainians don't get hurt in that narrative. So if you guys put out more statements that we can circulate, that helps us undercut that narrative.
Okay, I think that was a contribution rather than a question, although I don't know if, Sofiia, if you'd like to respond to that at all.
Can I say it's a good idea?
and I think I will say from the position of England and Wales, we all have resource constraints, and but I think there was encouragement there, and I'm sure you're taking that on board. And I think that point of I'm going to be speaking in the House tomorrow. There's actually a debate on Ukraine in the House of Lords tomorrow. And one of the things that I'll be talking about, I only have 5 minutes, so there's a lot to cram in, and I haven't written the speech yet. But I think it's really important that we also look around the world, and we spoke about certain left-wing elements in the UK that don't really understand what's happening in the Russian attack on Ukraine, and that's also true on a global scale. And I think there is a real problem, and what I'll be saying tomorrow is that there is a problem for Ukraine in being allied with what's broadly known as the West, and lots of countries with good reason who don't trust the West. And there's a real job of work to be done to try and, and I think for Ukraine and, maybe Ukrainian Greens can do this, reach out and ideally make links with green groups, green parties in Africa, etc.
Yeah, we are always ready to move on, to do more, but we don't have so much voice here in Ukraine, and we are not given to access to television or radio. Maybe you understand why all information that we can provide only through the social media, Instagram, Facebook, for example. We always post there. We always write on English, so as everyone can see that. And I always every day I make posts, Instagram stories about the whole situation. I speak English to my international audience, and what else can we do here?
Okay, and I think that there's a lesson there of, look out for Ukrainian green links and share them, and that's something that everyone can do. Elise, I could see you're the first person I saw had their hand up.
Thank you. And this is thank you to all our speakers. And this is those that don't know me won't know that this is particularly emotional for me, because my grandfather was from Odessa. So when Ukraine doesn't get as much news coverage as it should in this country, it particularly angers me. Through my work over the years with international work through the Green Party, something that I've been very keen on is twinning, and I wonder if there is any scope for some of our local parties to twin with Greens around Ukraine. And if we try and do some formal twinning links, then at least we have a something two-way, and in particular, it's an opportunity for Ukrainian Greens to notify and alert us of what's going on.
I mean, just to add to that, I mean, we now run or are part of running quite a large number of councils, certainly around England. And so, I mean, I think the idea of twinning would be to match up a city or a town or even a village with something of vaguely similar size, and maybe a rural one with a rural one, etc. So I don't know, Sophia or Victoria, if you know of anything like that happening, and it's something perhaps to take away and think about.
Wilson, Stuart Wilson, are you with us?
I am indeed.
Super. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening all. Sorry, I don't have a video up. I really liked the vision that Viktoriya set out in her presentation about where Ukraine or what the green vision is for Ukraine going forward. I've worked in the NGO movement and the environment development world for about 30 years. And one of the things that worries me, I'm assuming here that Ukraine has already won the war and will recover its currently occupied land at some time in the future, if not through conflict. Hopefully not. I really want to zoom out and ask if anyone is keeping an eye on the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and how they are lining up to manage Ukraine's debt by forcing through policy changes on, for example, land consolidation, agriculture, big ag, selling off national forests and that sort of stuff. It's a long-term question, but from my experience working in a lot of developing countries, these sorts of World Bank IMF policies are the biggest threat to achieving the vision that Viktoriya has set out in her presentation. And I'm just wondering if anyone is keeping an eye on that long-term concern.
Panelists, would you like to respond?
Sorry.
Natalie, can we go to you?
Yes. I mean, I think the whole idea of the nature of the idea of development, and something some people may know, I've got a book out called Change Everything, which addresses a lot of that financialization and the approaches of those things. And I've got a new book coming out next year along the same kind of territory. I mean, I think none of this is in any way unique to Ukraine. The kind of pressures to fit in with late neoliberal capitalism to operate on those frames. I think in some ways, I mean, one of the things that I found really encouraging was being in Kyiv. There is actually a lot of small independent businesses, cooperatives. I saw, I mean, I was only there a few days, but I saw real evidence of different ideas of ways of doing things. And of course, there's many negatives from Ukraine's longer term history going back in the USSR era, and, absolute horrors in that period. But there's also different structures and different models that are available to people that people are aware of. And so there is the chance to start to build something different. Of course, it's going to be enormously difficult with the pressure on resources after the war. But, I'm broadly positive. And I think the other thing is, I think there's going to be a huge cultural flowering. It's already visible in Kyiv now, of artists, of craftspeople, of even, chefs and cooks, and so there's a possibility of building different kind of things and different models. And, it's one of our jobs from the outside is to lean on those kind of structures and restrain them as much as we possibly can from the outside. Thanks.
We have hands raised. Sasha, you have your hands raised. Would you like to come in at all?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for letting me interlope. I'm not a Green Party member. I'm on the committee of the Ukraine Solidarity campaign, and I've been liaising with the comrades who set up the group that organised this meeting, Green Ukraine Solidarity. So it's a pleasure to be here. Just a sort of 15-second comment and a question to Natalie. The 15-second comment is in terms of things that people can do. one thing Ukraine Solidarity Campaign does is we have almost constant multiple fund appeals for various causes in Ukraine, which have a connection to the labour movement in Ukraine, so the workers' movement and social movements in Ukraine, whether that's essential workers behind the lines, so firefighters, health workers, miners, education workers, and others, whether it's people with connections to the unions who are serving at the front. So there are regular appeals, and one thing people can do is raise money for those appeals. My question to Natalie is, I'm wondering where you think the debate about the wider framework of the war is at in the Green Party of England and Wales, both at a leadership level and a grassroots level. Obviously, you've got a lot of people, a lot of new members. Some would see the Green Party as moving to the left. Obviously, you've got new leadership. I would suspect that if that motion that Conway put together had been taken, there would have been quite a lively debate, let's say, over it. So I'm wondering where you think that debate is at and how it's likely to play out. Thank you.
I think, my personal position, where I start from, and I think where the party broadly starts from, is we believe in self-determination, international human rights, and the rule of law. And now that's something that I apply in and do a limited amount, but what I can work on in everything from West Papua to Tibet to the Uyghurs in China I did a great deal of work on Hong Kong. And those are foundational Green Party principles of self-determination and the rule of law. And Ukraine's right to self-determination applies every bit as much as it does to all of those other cases which the Green Party has been working on for many decades. And we stand up and hold up for human rights and the rule of law. And I think it's interesting that we have backed parliamentarians, we've all backed acknowledging that Ukraine is a much smaller country and attacked by a much larger neighbour with a much larger economy and military complex. And therefore, we have supported efforts to support the Ukrainian military, to supply materials to the Ukrainian military. And I don't have any doubt that that would be, as you say, there will be people who don't hold that view. And in the Green Party, we don't whip. We always respect people's other views, but I think that is the overwhelming view of the party. And I think, as you say, there probably would have been a lively debate, but I think that motion would have overwhelmingly passed the conference. Thanks.
I see there are 4 raised hands. Tom Madge, have we heard from you yet?
Let's try and... Okay, can you hear us okay? I've literally just joined the party tonight because I've been so close to joining, and then I saw this was happening. Actually saw it through Ukrainian Solidarity Campaign, and I guess one thing that I'm interested in, and this is a question I guess for Natalie in regards to maybe the wider perspective and the wider ability of the Green Party, kind of piggybacking a little bit on what Sasha was saying about the kind of renewed maybe public political power that the Green Party is kind of enjoying at the moment, and that maybe the bigger and more effective communications around Green Party. That's suddenly, I would say that's a really great aspect, and it feels to me like, obviously going back, thinking about the history of Ukraine and how it's been kind of submerged for such a long time, so many centuries, it feels like it's kind of a blank canvas in the West and in the UK in a way, and that's been kind of painted on by quite a lot of the propaganda and the disinformation. It feels like that's the story of Ukraine, and the story of the culture and the history and things hasn't really been told that well in Britain. And maybe can the Greens do more to use their sort of more powerful kind of public messaging to maybe link with some kind of storytelling messaging organizations in Ukraine, say, for example, Ukrainer, who in the podcast Ukraine World, which is excellent English language kind of communication and about all of those things, and maybe some of the organizations here that we have links with, can we kind of try to create a better or more effective help people to sort of fall in love with Ukraine, because I think you need to love something before you can care to protect it. And I think maybe that's part of the problem in the left, is that there's a bit an invisibility or an ignorance about Ukraine, and maybe we can fill that with like something better quality information.
Tom, in summary, what is your question to Natalie? In short,
it's like, can we do better? Can the Green Party do more of that?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think whilst we are now enjoying, and for those who don't know, I was leader of the Green Party from 12 to 16, and that was during the first Green surge, and we're now hopefully heading towards 3 times the maximum number of members we had then. But we still struggle for airtime certainly in mainstream outlets, etc. But I think you've hit on something really important here, which is, there is, about the whole of Eastern Europe, there's not a great deal of knowledge across British society, and the Green Party of England and Wales is part of British society. And I think there is a real job of work to be done to explain the history, explain both some of the horrors of the past under the era of Soviet repression, but also the lovely culture. And, I spoke a little bit about this. And one of the things that I've actually been saying is that the last, I only had one really free night in Kyiv, and I actually went to this utterly amazing Chinese restaurant being run by a group of very young locals, which wouldn't, with its design, with its menu, with everything about it, would have looked perfectly fitting in Hackney, in East London, the absolute trendiest. And it struck me, and I've been running around saying this ever since, that about 10 years ago I was in Zagreb, when Zagreb was essentially where the young people of Europe were going to party, were going to gather, and there was lots of little cultural shops and craft shops and wonderful restaurants and everything. And I can well see Kyiv after the war really adopting that place. So I think talking about the long history, the positive history, the fascinating cultural elements, the way in which, I was reading up this time and after my previous visits about how culturally different Ukraine is to Russia, and that goes back many centuries. Russia was occupied by the Mongols. Kyiv, Ukraine has different cultural and religious history to Russia does. All of those things. I don't think the Green Party of England and Wales on its own can provide education about that. But one of the things we can do is educate people within the Green Party. And, that's what tonight is perhaps a start of something much broader on. So I think, we can try, but I think a lot of the work is actually within the party and helping people understand. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I was really impressed with all the fantastic work that's being done on sustainability and green co-ops and trying to build a better Ukraine for the future when the war is over. But I think I'm one of these left-leaning types that people are concerned about. And Sofiia talked about what's going to happen in Ukraine after victory. So I'm wondering what she sees as victory, what she thinks is going to happen to achieve victory. And is she concerned that opinion polls, which early in the war showed like 70% of people wanting to fight until they got the Russians out, that's now completely reversed, and the majority of people want a negotiated settlement, which could have been achieved early in the war when Zelensky and Putin were negotiating, and Boris Johnson went out and said, don't, we'll back you for as long as it takes. So of course, I believe in solidarity with Ukrainian people, but I think to supply them with more and more weapons, particularly long-range weapons, and risk major escalation is not in the interest of the Ukrainian people or anybody.
Would you like to unmute yourself, Linda?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'd finished. So my question really was about what would Sofiia say victory would look like? What is she hoping is going to happen?
Thank you so much for your question. As you can see, I'm sitting now with a candle because we do not have electricity. For me and for all Ukrainians, the victory is no more dead. I don't want my friends to go to the front lines. I want them to be here at Kyiv with me, Sorry for that. And we just want to stop all these attacks. We just want to wake up and have a normal day, because we're really super tired through all this 4 years. We're really very tired. And yeah, of course, we need much more weapons. We need much more help because it's really hard to stay here and near the border, and we just want our land to come back to us. Sorry, I'm super emotional.
I'm very sorry, Sophie. Take your time.
Just want to support Sophia's words, if I may, because I think it's very important to really look at that data that you mentioned there, Linda, critically, where yes, Ukrainians would like an end to the war. Yes, Ukrainians would like there to be some sort of ceasefire eventually, and of course a victory, but the kind of victory that Ukrainians keep talking about, and is, these answers are not, they are not, how to say, I'm sorry, I forgot the English word, but sort of they still sort of align with those polls where we want the end of the war means justice through the return of the occupied territories. It means that Ukrainians are able to return to their homes, and that means, of course, Russia agreeing to the security guarantees that Ukrainians themselves, those that are the victims of this war, that Ukrainians actually lay out. Thank you.
I think we should allow Paul Ingram to speak.
Okay, thanks, Seb. I think that's really powerful, what we've just heard from the two Ukrainian responses, and I would like us to feel that strength and power and the appeal that this war needs to come to an end as soon as possible. And unfortunately, we have political leaderships in Moscow and in other capitals that think that this war can carry on almost indefinitely. The Americans want to bleed the Russians dry. The Russians want to think that they're winning, and they've got very good evidence to suggest that. And we need to end this war, which is why I was in China just 2 weeks ago with a recent foreign minister of Ukraine, talking to the Chinese about how they may intervene in a more constructive manner. There are people behind the scenes from Ukraine and elsewhere who are looking for constructive end to this war. And that's what we need to be focusing on, rather than strategies to carry this war on as long as it carries on, because not only is it going to be the deaths of hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians, increasing numbers, and the ecocide carrying on, but we are destroying global governance and the ability to tackle the catastrophic risks at a global level. And all of us involved in different ways are finding that progress is blocked because of this deep division in the heart of Europe. So I think I would say the thing we can do most effectively as a party and as a country is to fix this mess at the heart of Europe, which goes way beyond Ukraine. And Ukrainians are suffering appallingly. And we have an absolute responsibility to sort this out.
Would anyone like to raise a hand? Would they like a right of reply to Paul?
I guess I'll come in and say that I think it's, I can share an experience on my first trip to Ukraine in 23, coming back on the sleeper train out of Kyiv. I shared the carriage with a woman who I guess was probably in her late 20s, early 30s, with two children, aged 8 or 6 or so. They just spent some time with their father and husband, who was then going to a very dangerous part of the front line as a soldier. And there is enormous human suffering here. But ultimately, I think we have to be guided by, and it's not easy, of course, but we're guided by the Ukrainian people. I spoke about the issue of self-determination, and that is something that is very much a Green Party principle, and I think it's a human principle. And we cannot impose anything on the Ukrainians. We have to find a way in which the Ukrainians are able to speak for themselves, defend themselves. One of the things we haven't mentioned this evening that I've talked about in the House several times is the way in which the Russians have kidnapped large numbers of Ukrainian children, and essentially have been trying to turn them into Russians. There's huge numbers of issues here, and we've got to take all of those things on board collectively. And we've also got to acknowledge that there is, I think we may talk about this in the House quite a bit tomorrow. There is also a hybrid war, everything from explosive parcels, to low-level damaging of undersea cables. There is a great deal happening across Europe, not just in Ukraine, although of course Ukraine is totally on a different scale. And we need to be aware of all of those things that are happening, and that's the context in which we are now. And of course, we are also in the context of where we have a President Trump in the US, and that creates deep global uncertainty, which is just an unavoidable reality. Which is why, my personal perspective is really that we have to build global solidarity around the world with African countries, with Asian countries, with the non-superpowers. Think about the non-superpowers, and help people to see what the state is in world now. And, Barbados, for example, we're coming into COP30. Countries like Barbados, other island nations can be real leaders there. And what we should be doing as Britain is trying to support different countries, some of those smaller countries leading on all kinds of different issues, and not just focused on the China, the Russia, the US, but look very broadly. That's kind of one of the perspectives that I bring into this. Thanks.
Right. Adam Maunda, we see you've had your hand up.
Thank you. I just really wanted to thank everyone, Sofiia, in particular, for the time and what you've shared with us. I'm really pleased to see the Greens gaining so much over here, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we get as many seats as possible, as much power as possible, but I am worried that we might not give Ukraine enough support if the Greens get into power. And I'm really pleased that you've shared your stories here so that we can try and fight to make sure that we continue to do that, that my efforts to get the Greens in power does not also mean a less support for Ukraine. And I will make sure that everything I do to try and maintain that. And really, I didn't have a question other than what I put in the chat earlier, if there are any links to resources that I can use to educate myself to help push back against that sort of thing. And I really like what you've said about centering the Ukrainians' right to self-determination, and these narratives that I think that will resonate with other left-leaning people. So I just wanted to thank you. Thank you. And I suppose no question really, perhaps we can move on to the next person.
I don't believe we've heard from Mike Carney, Sasha. Could you put him on?
Hi, yes, apologies. Natalie has said much of what I wanted to say. I'm Mike from York. Hi, Natalie. Lovely to see you again. I have been to Ukraine numerous times throughout this invasion, and I will be in Ukraine next weekend. And so often, what's not heard, whether willingly or deliberately, is the voices of the Ukrainians. In all of this debate, it should be about Ukrainians and what they want. And respectfully, somebody talking about speaking to a politician in China, I don't think that I will take the word of a dictatorship that locks up hundreds of thousands of pro-democracy activists in their country, including suppressing the Uyghur population, with a no limits partnership with Russia as an actor of good faith. So please listen to the Ukrainians. And just in terms of when I'm in Ukraine a lot, is I'm just sitting there listening to them. LGBT people in Ukraine want freedom. They do not want to live under Russian occupation, because living under Russian occupation means suppression, it means death, it means having to flee. They have freedom in Ukraine and they want to continue to live free. So let's listen to Ukrainians, all Ukrainians, and support them in their self-determination.
Thank you so much. Can I say a few words? Thank you so much for all your support today. Really, it is very important. If you want, I can make an online Zoom next time with our chairs. All of you know Vitaly Kononov, you know my mom, Sofiia Bodun. So yeah, if you have some more fluent questions, you can ask them. But what we see after victory, I remember there were questions, but I don't remember from who. And we hope there will be elections soon in Ukraine, and we very hope to get into parliament, because, you know, of course, without power, it is very difficult to do all these ideological and basic things, and we must have power in Ukraine, and after this we can just rebuild Ukraine on some basis of sustainable and green development. But as for now, it is really difficult to do.
Thank you so much. Well, I appreciate that we are approaching 8:30. I think that it's been quite exhausting for Natalie, particularly for Sofiia, and Viktoriya's put so much effort in. I'm going to assume that people will be happy for us to close at this point, but we will follow up. Thank you so much, Sofiia. We will take up your offer to keep in touch and liaise with you, and hopefully communicate over, well, at a more peaceful time of day. So thank you, Natalie, Sofiia and Viktoriya, for showing such thoughtful and powerful insights with us this evening. What we've heard tonight, the Ukraine struggle is not only about defending its sovereignty, but about shaping a future that is just, sustainable and inclusive. The climate crisis does not pose for war, and the choices are made now in reconstruction, in energy, in social justice, will echo far beyond Ukraine's borders. We've also been reminded that solidarity is not a slogan, but a practice. It means listening, learning, and acting together across movements and across nations. Whether through parliamentary advocacy, party politics, or grassroots activism, each of us has a role to play in ensuring that Ukraine's voice is heard in the global climate movement. As we leave, I hope we carry with us both the urgency and the hope that tonight's discussion has sparked. Urgency because the challenges are immense. Hope because the courage and creativity of those leading the way in Ukraine and beyond show us that another future is possible. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation and for the solidarity you bring into it. Let's continue to build these connections, and let's make sure that Ukraine's green and just future is part of our shared global story. Before we close, I want to thank our panelists once again for their time in signing commitment. Thank you all of you for being part of this conversation. A special thanks as well to the other organisers, particularly Sasha Ismail from Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, who made tonight possible. If you'd like to stay connected, please do keep an eye on follow-up and materials and upcoming events, and continue the conversations you started here. Solidarity is not built just in meetings like this, but in the actions and networks that grow afterwards. Thank you all for joining this call, and have a pleasant Friday and a good weekend. Bless you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.